Welcome to the Mad and Crip Theology podcast, hosted by Miriam, Spies, and Amy Panton, which come out of the Canadian Journal of Theology, Mental Health, and Disability.
We both live and work on lands that have been homes and remain homes to the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron Wendat, the Neutral, and the Ojibway Chippewa peoples and other peoples who have cared for the land.
We are grateful for the opportunity to live and work on this land and are mindful of the need to repair broken covenants.
This podcast is an opportunity to model how faith communities can engage in theological and spiritual conversations around madness and cripness.
If you need a full transcript, you can find our videos on our YouTube channel.
We want to say before we begin that topics and conversations we are raising throughout our time together are often hard.
They are hard for Mad and Crip people ourselves, and hard for our families and loved ones.
So do what you need to do to take care of yourselves, your bodies, minds, and hearts.
And now, here is our episode.
Hello. It is so great to be with all of you this afternoon on this Friday afternoon. Again, we thank you so much for giving up some of your day to come and be with us here on the podcast. And today we're doing double duty. We have two podcasts today. So it's been a great day. And we want to introduce our guests today. We have Michael Serch and Matthew Arguin here with us. So welcome to you both.
And before we dive into our conversation, we wondered if you could both introduce yourself. And we put that in the chat, your pronouns, where you work or serve, and your connection to disability and mental health as well as the journal. And since we're a podcast that appears also on YouTube, I wondered if you could give a visual description of yourself for those who are hearing instead of watching. So, Michael, can you get us started?
Happy to. Thank you for inviting me to be here and for letting me be part of the first edition. My name is Michael Serch. I use he and him pronouns. I am joining you from La Crosse, Wisconsin in the United States, where I work as a psychotherapist. Kind of focus on helping folks who have chronic mental health conditions and substance use issues. I identify as an individual in recovery myself, both with mental health and substance use. I'm from the Wisconsin area. I'm also the child of a person who had psychotic experiences, and I'm the father of an individual who's on the autism spectrum. Visually, I think I look like a hobbit, kind of curly reddish hair, beard, kind of short, kind of round, wearing a cardigan, and joining you from my basement, which isn't as scary as it sounds.
I think that may be the best visual description yet.
I totally agree. That's awesome.
So, thank you for that. And
I think we're a bunch of geeks here.
Oh, totally.
Definitely.
I'm not sure if you can be that mad, but please introduce yourself.
Oh, that's a tough act to follow for sure. I'm not sure I can top it. But so I'm in London, Ontario, which is in Canada. It's about a 2-hour drive from Toronto. And I am an ordained Anglican priest. I have been ordained for about 9 years, although I'm currently not involved in parish ministry. My main gig right now is actually at some pop-up shelters here in the city. We've gotten some coverage here in Canada, but in case you don't know, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of the shelters in and around the city are at like half capacity because they can't do full capacity because they have to ensure social distancing and all of that. So the city approved a plan to make temporary shelters out of trailers. So it's just like a bed and like a lamp, and that's pretty much it. But then there's a bunch of trailers that have been put together to form a common trailer, which is where the residents come to eat. They come for social time, and it's also designed as a harm reduction area, so they can come and take their medicine as needed. And then, so I've been doing that for the better part of 8 months or so, because we started around Christmas. So that's what I've been doing for the majority of the pandemic. And then the visual description of myself, basically I look like a hot mess right now because I haven't had a haircut in about 3 months. So my hair is a little bit messy. It's brown in color. I have some facial hair right now because I'm too lazy to shave. And I'm wearing a green t-shirt with the rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock hierarchy on it. So yes, we are all nerds here for sure.
I feel very at home.
Man, I can't see the shirt. I just see the top of it. Would you be comfortable showing more of the rock, paper, scissors? Because this sounds awesome.
That's the best I can do because I'm on my phone right now. But yeah.
That's amazing, Matt. Amazing.
Yeah.
I think you managed to meet Michael in his description.
It's a good group altogether, so I'm pretty excited to be here and to help out with the journal. It's something that I didn't necessarily expect to be involved in, but I got an invitation from Miriam to write something up, and that's how I got connected to the journal itself.
For me, it was good old Facebook. I saw a post about it, and I don't even remember where I saw it, and I was just like, this is the coolest combination, because like I totally will geek out on these 3 topics and the intersection of these, and I was like, oh, I hope they'll accept someone from down south, your loud and not always friendly neighbor down south in the United States. And oh, we've got a friend.
Yes, you may, if you're watching this on YouTube or through any visual medium, you might see a cat walk by the camera at any given point.
I love them.
Yes, we love cats here too. So,
Michael, you made me happy because I'm in charge of Facebook for now. So it is working, which is awesome.
It is.
Over to you, Amy.
Thanks, Mir. So we prepared a few questions for Matt and Michael today that we were able to send them a little in advance. So hopefully that prompted that will prompt some interesting conversations for this afternoon. So Michael, we're going to start with you. So the piece that you wrote for the first issue of the journal was so interesting. And for me, it was very captivating because you were able to write about history and also film. And as a total film nerd who went to film school, the minute I read it, I was like, this is so cool. So I was able to do my geeking out around film and mental health, which is the other thing that I nerd out about. So it's a very good combination for me. So I was wondering if you could tell our listeners who may not know about the person that you wrote about in the paper, R.D. Laing, would you be able to tell our listeners a little bit about who he was and why he was important for you to want to write about?
Sure. So I'm kind of new to Laing, and I think in a fair amount of the paper, like Laing is sort of in conversation with Dorothy Day, and as far as I can tell, they've never met in real life. I could find no record of them, even though they were contemporaries. Day I'm really familiar with, and those who aren't familiar with her, she had founded the Catholic Worker Movement, which really was based on this, like, I'm going to take personal responsibility and connect to my fellow humans. And there's another cat there. Love it.
This is Oliver. Say hi.
Yeah, mine's asleep behind me. I don't know if she'll join us. So she created these like shelters and soup kitchens, but also like some real intense public protest about issues. And there's some parallels between what Dorothy Day is talking about, and I swim in the Dorothy Day world, and then what Laing was talking about. And I kind of came across Laing because of this movie, Mad to Be Normal, which stars David Tennant, and those who are Doctor Who fans will be familiar with him as the Doctor. So Laing was a Scottish psychiatrist. He ended up kind of being outside the norm in the 60s and 70s in the psychiatric world, and saying that people with mental health issues, like, what they're saying has value, and that we need to be respecting folks' autonomy. And he helped create these communities where people, caregivers and those who needed care for whatever reason, were living together and trying to be as non-hierarchical as possible. As you can imagine, there's a level of like chaos that then ensues, as I'm sure Matt is experiencing in his current work. And so that was very similar to Dorothy Day's life. And in the movie, you see that, like, this community of people, and they're trying to, work together as human beings, each with their failings. Laing definitely was a very human person, and in some ways he's a little bit more relatable than like Dorothy Day. She's in the process of being sainted, and she didn't like that at all. But like she's a pretty good human, and Laing is a pretty human. I think he was married 4 times. He struggled with substances. He had 10 kids. He wasn't involved in their lives. He's writing all these books about family dynamics, and his kids are like, "What about us, Dad?" And in some ways, like, it's both approachable and a little hard, because I feel a little judgy at times about him. Like, I was reading I love old paperbacks, and so I found this paperback, and it was articles, and someone's writing about Laing, and they're like, "When I met him, he was blind, stinking drunk, and he didn't make any sense." And I was like, wow, he did kind of work his own recovery as time went on, but he was never a perfect person, and I don't think anyone's putting him forward to sainthood. So that's a little bit about Laing and sort of what I was trying to do with the paper. And like, as a therapist, how do I bring these strains together, in my own work in this weird COVID world where we are virtual and cats are on our laptops, and, like, your phone is pinging at you with like, oh, there's an Instagram post. And like, for both Laing and Dorothy Day, like, trying to be attentive to the other was like one of the key pieces of their insight. And it's like, man, that's a challenging discipline I try to do, whether it's with my kids, with my cat, with my patients. So a little bit of what the essay was attempting to do.
Wonderful. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about how either Day or Laing or both of them have influenced your therapeutic practice. Can you see any ways that they may pop into your mind as you're working with clients?
Yeah, for Laing, he was, at the time they called it the anti-psychiatry movement, which is, I think, a misnomer. I think now we would be talking about like this is the early stages of the disability rights movement. You know, he was saying, what are you trying to say? How can I connect with you? And trying to break down this hierarchy. So, you know, I try and do that as well. Like, how do we get off of this power trip thing? You know, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? And is there something I can do to help with that, and not be too directive? For Day, both Lang and Day were really quite critical of the existing system, you know, and that's something that I continue to like have as this tension in my life, because like I have this official adult job that is officially paying me money, and I'm doing work that's meaningful, but like I'm also participating in systems that don't seem fair or just. And how do I make peace with that? In both a Lang and Dorothy Day fashion, because I'm not living with folks that are unhoused or experiencing homelessness at this point. You know, my practice is kind of removed in that sense. So, you know, glad to be part of a conversation with you, Matt, because you're like right in the midst of it.
Yeah, although when I wrote the poem for the journal, I wasn't at all. Like, I was in a completely different place. And so it's interesting sort of how any articles that we write or any poems that we compose are always snapshots of where we are, right? I always find that part of it interesting as well.
What were you doing at the time?
At the time, I was unemployed. So my whole thing was right at the end of 2019, the contract with the church that I was at ended. So I was going into 2020, sort of applying for different jobs and sort of looking at different things. And then 2-3 months into it, COVID hits and all the churches close. And I'm like, what do I do now? So from about January to, well, December, because the shelter started around Christmas, I was completely sort of not attached to any parish, not to any particular ministry. We did have short periods, maybe 2 or 3 months in the summer, where Ontario opened back up, but overall, the lockdowns were pretty intense. And so there wasn't a whole lot in terms of job prospects either. And so when I wrote the poem, it was reflecting on some of the experiences that I had had of like, what do we do now in this church where we're meeting virtually? And like you said, like not having that personal one-to-one interaction, that changes the worship space as well. And it changes our mental approach. And like, so all of that was feeding into my writing at the time. And it's really interesting looking, you know, at this point, about 8 months in retrospect, sort of how, and of course now we're moving into a different phase of the pandemic here too. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that develops. And I think that's one of our later questions. So I'll save some of the reflections for that as well.
Well, that's awesome. I love how we're already connecting each other's work. I wonder, Matt, if you could read your poem for us, and then I have a follow-up question to dig into.
Sure. Just let me pull it up in the chat here.
It's a really beautiful piece.
Here we go. So this is the poem here. Lord, if you will not go before me, do not send me up. If I go alone, I'll be lost. I'll lie to those around me, trying to find a way out. If I go alone, I'll be afraid of the desert, of my people, of myself. But if you'll go with me, Lord, I might be able to make sense of all of this. I might be able to enjoy the manna and not fear the snakes. If you go ahead of me, Lord, I'll see waters rise and armies crushed. I'll see the sick healed and a people chosen. If you'll go ahead of me, Lord, I will strive to hear your voice and speak to you of what's in my heart. We may even fight, get hurt, but I won't let go until you give me a blessing.
Oh, wow, Matt. That was wonderful to hear it spoken.
Oh, glad to share for sure.
We are wondering, you talk about writing this in a different area of COVID and how we're moving to this new phase that I think also feels a bit unknown to us in the world and us in practice and in the church and in leadership. So I wonder if you could talk about what this next phase is looking like for your mental health and for the mental health of the people you serve with.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start off with that first half of the question of what does it mean for mental health for me? It definitely, I think the pandemic for me, not only for me, but for a lot of people, has forced me to think about and reflect on what's actually important, right? To sort of not get or try not to get overwhelmed by some of the stuff that's coming at you. And to realize that I'm not in control of the situation, which if you're a member of the clergy at all, that tends to be a struggle with me and my colleagues, right? We like to know what's going on, how it's going to get done, exactly how it's going to unfold. But that doesn't really happen in the middle of a pandemic. And so that, I think, is the biggest aspect of trying to figure this whole thing out, is how do we give up control without losing our minds? And I mean that quite literally, because sometimes when you don't have that sense of control, it becomes a little chaotic, right? And I think for myself, it's being able to let that go. And in my current context of those that I serve, when I show up at the shelter, I have to show up being open and ready to talk about what they want to talk about, the struggles that they're dealing with. It's interesting right now because we're actually in the middle of transitioning the project. So right now, it's a bunch of trailers that are at the back of the men's mission here in London. We're actually in the process of transitioning them over to an apartment building complex. The organization that runs the project has signed head leases for 24 units within a building. And so we're going to be moving over there within the next week or so. And that's a whole other kettle of fish. It's moving people, it's getting all their stuff over, it's trying to allay some of their fears and anxieties, because as everybody knows, moving sucks. I hate it. I hate putting stuff in boxes. I hate sorting through stuff. And it's a stressful thing. And it's even more stressful when you're going from a solution that was sort of haphazard and put together at the last minute. And now we're being asked to change again along with the residents. So it's been a time of being able to try to be present, try to let go of the control, and just to sort of go with the flow, as hard as that is. And in the midst of it, try to pray. try to be honest with how I'm feeling and how the people might be feeling as well. Because again, when we're dealing with lack of control, that can be difficult. And so for me, one of the grounding things is to pray. And that was part of what came out of the writing as well. Because again, when I don't know what to do or what I don't know how I don't know how to react, I tend to just write things down. So whether it's just a rant on Facebook or a poem that I compose, that's usually how I process. So.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. You touched on a key thing that I'm struggling with in my own work, and we didn't give you this question ahead of time, so you can definitely pass. But as a disabled person, I know we talked about this before and how the church or congregations like to control who's in leadership or who's able to serve in leadership and what bodies are desired to be in the pulpit. So you don't have to go there, but if you want to, I would love to hear how that invitation to ease up on control over what's going to happen or what should happen aligns with how you and I are called to serve the church.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think that's really contingent upon is whether we go back to normal after COVID, whatever normal is, because I think there is an openness now to recognizing that people, whether disabled or not, can't do everything. They can't do all of the things that are always asked of them. And so there's been an opportunity for people to work from home, which hasn't really been an option before. There's been an opportunity for people to contribute in ways to their community that they might not be able to. I'm thinking specifically here about online worship, right? Being able to give a sermon or something where you couldn't get up to the pulpit, but you can get on a Zoom call and do it from your couch. That's like a really important thing, right? And just having access and accessibility in terms of an online service to begin with. I mean, I know for my denomination, the Anglican Church has struggled with an online presence and doing live streams and Facebook stuff and Zoom calls and all of that. But it has opened up a new avenue of accessibility. And so I think there's an opportunity to keep that accessibility growing and as something that is continually improved. But it's also a temptation to just say, oh, we're just going to go back to normal and it's going to be all the same.
Yeah.
So we could definitely go in either direction. I don't know which we're going to choose, but I hope it's the more accessible one.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. I know as a beginning of COVID, we couldn't imagine being online for a year or more, and that has happened, and people have worshiped and created different kinds of communities, which demonstrates a lot of possibility, even though I love and miss people and miss being in the same room with people at the same time.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting reclaiming that in-person
Yeah.
piece, because I think, and I'm thinking Michael can probably speak to this too. It's getting used to those social norms again. It's what do we do now? Do we shake hands? There's a whole relearning process that has to go along with it.
Yeah. And that relearning process is a chance to rethink what our norms have been and how they might be changed.
Yeah.
Michael, do you? Yeah.
That moment of greeting or saying goodbye, and you have that awkward, like, what do we do now? Like, do I shake your hand? Do I bump your shoulder? Do I just wave? Like, yeah, what happens? And here in Wisconsin, the mask mandate has ended, so suddenly folks, I mean, you'd see a few individuals without a mask and you immediately knew their political orientation before, and now you're seeing all sorts of people without masks. It feels almost revealing, like, oh,
yeah,
I'm not used to seeing the bottom of your face.
And I was going to ask, and I don't know whether you want to put this at a further part in the podcast, so feel free to edit after the fact there, Miriam and Amy. But Michael, how has that affected your practice? Like, because again, even though you're dealing with psychotherapy and there is a lot of talk involved, there's also that in-person connection, right? Like, how have you found that it's changed your approach, or even the approach of your patients or clients, or whatever the proper term is that you use?
It's changed in so many ways. So I mean, before the pandemic, we were told at our healthcare system, like, that, there's no way that anyone would work virtually. And then all of a sudden we came up with a virtual system overnight. And now we're slowly coming back in person. And it's this, in the States, you don't have to wear a mask, but in a healthcare setting, you still do. And so then there's this dance of, some want to wear a mask and some don't want to wear a mask. Some never want to take it off. Some insist on taking it off. I've had some clients who love virtual visits because of accessibility, or some people with like agoraphobia, like they've been able to say, like, I feel so much more comfortable. I can do this from home and I'm not very dysregulated. And other people are like, this is weird and I don't like it and I want to come in and I only have so many spots in person. And our state has very clear rules that certain populations have to be seen in person. Like if you're on a methadone program, you have to be seen in person. So like, there are only so many spots I can give to the in-person folks. And we're right on a border of another state. Our states are much smaller than your Canadian provinces. So then we can't cross state lines anymore for virtual visits. So like, I got to get my Minnesota people in person. It's like, it's creating new challenges and new headaches. I really do like the virtual visits, and a number of people do like them, but it means you have to have internet and you have to have a computer, and not everyone does.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's accessible and inaccessible at the same time. It's wild.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, I was thinking as both of you were talking, I hurt my back recently, which is like a whole other story, but I had to go and get physiotherapy, and also I've been seeing a chiropractor to help with that. And like, I've been seeing them for months, and I was thinking to myself the other day, I literally have never seen either of their faces, even though they've been taking care of me for months. And it's so strange. Like, I imagine what their faces look like under their masks, but it's such a strange time when we really are having, I mean, for me anyway, I think about, it's like a different kind of relationship that I have with these people. And I don't know if we're going to have like a party or something once they're able to take off their masks, but it's just, yeah, what a strange time we're in right now.
Well, and I'm sure you've had this experience too, as people are starting to sort of ease up on the mask restrictions a bit. I mean, I've had instances where people have taken off their mask and I don't even know who they are, because all I've seen is ever a masked face. Like, it's very strange, right?
Very strange, yes. That's funny because my mom said to me the other day, we're doing a few renovations here at our house, and we had an electrician coming through the house, and he always had his mask on. And then he came by the other day without his mask. My mom turned to me and she said, "Who's that?" I'm like, "Mom, that's the electrician who's been coming here for like 3 months. You do know him." And anyway, sorry, I digress. So yeah, it's a very, very strange time. So we wanted to ask both of you if you would speak to each other about each other's work. And we just wondered if you had any questions as you were reading each other's pieces, or if anything struck you as interesting that you might want to tell the other person. So Michael, I might ask you to begin.
Sure, yeah. Matt, I enjoyed that intertextual piece of, your offering this personal reflection on this piece from Exodus where Moses is asking the Lord, like, go ahead of me. And this is the right around where, the God is like, you can't see me, but you can see my backside. This like really weird story.
Super weird. Yeah.
It is. Yes. And I was wondering, what was it about that particular story? I had imagined like, oh, was this like, this was liturgically, this was just when it came up in the readings of the day, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, so it did come up in the lectionary. So that was sort of a set piece, and this poem was in conjunction with preparing a sermon. Although the poem sort of went off and took its own course, as poems often do. But a lot of it is, especially in the Torah, so Genesis through Deuteronomy, Moses and the other patriarchs are extremely upfront with God. I mean, Moses basically says before this in chapter 32, when he finds the golden calf, he's like, look, God, I know they screwed up. I know that they deserve to be punished, but please have mercy on them, right? And Moses is just very bold about that. Same thing with Abraham. In Genesis, you'll find him at least 2 or 3 times like ask God, be like, are you sure this is what you really want? Sure, the people are not behaving in the right way, but please forgive them. And I think the whole idea that the prophets of the Torah were bold enough to like be honest with God about their feelings and what they wanted for their people, that just really, I always find that interesting. And so part of the poem for me was tapping into that conversation, if you will. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I do have a question for you as well, because I just actually, before we came on, I actually finished watching the movie. And apart from the fact that I kept on waiting for Doctor Who to just like zip out of that timeline and go to a new one, right? I was fascinated by the movie itself, and also by your article. Because as you were going through and talking about sort of his approach to psychotherapy, and then you worked in Dorothy Day, and then you worked in a little bit of the Brothers Karamazov when you were talking about Father Zosima, I was like, wait a minute, this sounds a lot like spiritual direction. Like just in terms of pastoral presence and sort of being an attentive other to the person that you're with. So I'm wondering, like, in spiritual direction, there's a very specific sort of aim, right? It's to help the other person see where God is active in the events and active in the conversation. So I'm just wondering, for you as a psychotherapist, how does that change? Like, what is the focus? Does that make any sense?
It does, yeah. It's really interesting. My mother is a spiritual director. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a ton of parallels between psychotherapy and spiritual direction, while at the same time they are different. But I think that, you know, trying to be present, particularly a accepting, loving presence, is one of the uniting aspects of them. Even though the spiritual director is asking, where is God in this? And the psychotherapist is a bit more focused on, like, what's the problem and how do we help you solve it? You know, we're working on a treatment plan, and because it's the medical model, we have to have a diagnosis and, you know, bill insurance and all that.
Right.
So I mean, yeah, but there are a lot of parallels. I know my mom will be very clear in saying, you know, when they start seeing clinical problems, they're saying, oh, you need to see someone else for this. You know, my job is not to help you with anxiety or depression. But you can still be in direction and be depressed or anxious or struggle with substances or, you know,
Yeah.
whatnot. And we as psychotherapists, as a field, we're becoming more comfortable with religious questions. Certainly, you know, the bad old days with Freud, who viewed everything religious as a sign of neuroticism, where, you know, no, it's really a sign of people's strength and their wellness. And, you know, in the same way that we want people to have good nutrition and engage in exercise and have social situations, like, what is your spiritual expression? And allowing folks to be different with it. There is a generational divide. Like, some of my older peers in the field are like, no, I don't touch spirituality at all. And I was like, I don't understand how you could do that. Or
Yeah,
it's sometimes,
it's a whole dimension of the person, right?
right, yeah. Or it's sometimes like just held to the addiction folks because of AA and the higher power. But even then, that tends to be kind of surfacey. You know, give it up to your higher power, you know. But like, I enjoy delving in folks' spirituality if that's part of their life. And if it's not, then that's totally fine and we don't have to go there. I guess that would be a difference too. Like, folks who are going to spiritual direction inherently are interested in spirituality, where folks coming to therapy are not necessarily.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool.
That's really
Sometimes with folks who are experiencing some psychotic issues, we have to like help figure out like what seems authentic spirituality and what is like, oh, that might be part of the illness, you know, that God didn't actually call me to do that. So that's an interesting piece that I actually quite enjoy.
That's so interesting, Michael. And you know, this summer it's been a real joy. I've been teaching a course on mental health and Christian theology, and one of the questions that the students really keep bringing up and keep wrestling with is this idea of spiritual experience and psychosis. You know, how do we know what's going on? And I've had a lot of the students talk about, especially the students who are studying to become psychotherapists, still have these questions around, how do I know? You know, Amy, when will we get to the point where we feel confident enough to be able to guide our clients one way or the other? And I mean, I guess for myself, from a theological side, I think it's really interesting that the students they're not dismissive right away. They always say, well, there's something here. Maybe God really is speaking. And I like to have that that openness and create that space where we can all ask the questions together. So thanks so much for talking about that. That's really helpful. I guess we just have one more question now as we're kind of finishing up our time together today. And one question that Miriam and I are just interested in, and we always ask our guests who come on the podcast, is around this whole question of self-care. So we were wondering if both of you could talk a little bit about your self-care. Both of you are in helping professions. At this time, it's really hard all over the world with the pandemic. And also, I think Miriam and I talk a lot about, you know, doing this work in disability or mental health, it can be very hard. A lot of the times it feels like you can kind of go under as you're reading a lot of these stories of abuse and other things. So would you be able to tell us, what does your self-care look like right now, if there is any? That would be really great. Matt, would you be able to start us off?
Sure. So self-care for me has a different couple of looks to it. So the job schedule that I'm on now at the shelter is 10-hour shifts, both day shift and night shift. We do 2 weeks of days and then 2 weeks of nights. And typically in a week, you'll have about 2 or 3 days off. And so the first thing is to be really protective about those days off, and to make sure that if somebody's calling on you to take another shift, that you have to be comfortable with saying no if you're not good to go. That's been really important for me, because, like you said, it is a helping profession, and any helping profession will sort of have this impact, whether positive or negative. You can have really positive emotions one day and really negative emotions the next. And so being able to safeguard your Sabbath time is really important. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it for me is also the teams at the shelter that I work on are always teams of 5. And so being able to bounce off other things with your colleagues and the people that you work with, whether they happen on the shift or whether they happen outside of the shift, having that as an outlet for discussion and reflection is really important, because I haven't really been able to do that in the context of a church lately, because the churches have all been closed, and even my spiritual director is only now getting comfortable in terms of meeting in person. So having a group that you work with, that you're comfortable with talking to about what comes up and what bubbles to the surface, that's really been my self-care at the moment. And, you know, just trying to get enough sleep and trying to eat well, which doesn't always work the best when you're living on your own. The temptation to order out is very, very strong. But trying to be attentive to those needs as well. I would say that would be what my self-care looks like right now.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I think I struggle around the student thing of defaulting to too much ramen noodles, so I can understand exactly what you mean about trying to eat well. So thank you so much for giving us some insights there.
Yeah.
And Michael, would you like to tell us about your self-care?
Yeah, in the before times, there was some discipline in the schedule, because, like, you know, you could see folks from this time to this time, and then, you know, reception was gone, and, you know, it was like you couldn't bring anyone into the office. And now if your office is at home, you can schedule people whenever, and it's been good, in that, like, suddenly we're more available and accessible. And it's been bad because it's really easy to just be like, oh, sure, I'll add another person. Oh yeah, I'll just start a little early. So my days just keep getting bigger and bigger. So for me, I've decided, like, okay, like, I can work with that, but when I'm off, I'm off. I'm not checking email. I'm not checking my voicemail. Like, if it's a vacation day, I really try and be disciplined, and, like, being off is being off. And I sometimes cheat, and then I, like, okay, no, this is about self-care. And yeah, just echoing what Matt was saying of, like, what are my basic needs? You know, have I eaten? Have I slept? You know, really trying to be disciplined on my my bedtime, and making sure dinner is, like, something with the whole family, has been really important. So yeah, I just came back from vacation, and it was like, this is really refreshing and rejuvenating, even though it wasn't like a relaxing vacation, because we moved and boxed everything up, and you know, but it, as Matt was saying, moving really, really sucks. But it wasn't work. It didn't have emotional labor in the same way. So yeah, trying to balance that out, I think, has been helpful. And for me, being able to do something like writing and submitting stuff to a journal like this has been like, oh, like it's connecting to another part of myself that is not just doing clinical notes, because those are really dry.
Well, that would be a follow-up question for me as well. As you were writing this article, what made you want to contribute to this particular, journal? Was it theology and mental health and disability something you were always interested in, or? I know you had spoken a little bit about your personal connections in terms of mental health and whatnot, but sort of what was the impetus for putting it in?
Yeah, exactly. I think that intersection of those three topics and I was just literally on fire when I had seen that Facebook post and was, I got to come up with an article for that. And my now wife, my partner at the time, she works in ministry, and I was helping her out do something at her church office. And I remember sitting there in her church office being like, what am I going to write about? Like, I got to come up with something. I sure hope they'll accept it. And I'm so glad you did, because yeah, it's a great intersection. I think it's an exciting space to really wrestle with topics.
Yeah, that's cool. And so had you seen the movie and wanted to write about the movie, or was this something that you had already seen and were just like, I'm going to put something down on paper?
I think I had just seen the movie as both a David Tennant fanboy and someone who was like exploring Lang a little bit. And I was like, who is this guy? Like, do I like him? Do I not like him? He seems kind of out there, and yet he's got some good stuff. The actor who had been in Mad Men, she plays Angie, the composite girlfriend.
Yeah.
I can't remember her name offhand, but I really like her. She's in Handmaid's Tale as well. There were some interesting actors in the film.
And one thing we didn't touch on, but I got to ask you about it because I am curious. I mean, one of the things in the movie, I'm not too sure about his writings, but in the movie he advocates, or at least portrays an advocacy for the use of LSD in terms of treating mental illness. So I'm just wondering, as a psychotherapist, whether you had any thoughts or reflections on that.
Yeah, and that is true to his lived experience. And I find there is a real place for psychedelic practice. We're seeing tons of evidence that, it can be helpful with PTSD, end of life care, addiction care, etc. I think some of the early advocates pushed it too far in the sense of their marketing and weren't doing good clinical trial. I'm thinking of Timothy Leary as a good example of that. I think there's a limit, like any tool. Leary's compatriot, Ram Dass, Richard Albert, has a wonderful memoir I just finished, Being Ram Dass, where he was like, LSD kind of took me to a place, but you get the phone call, but after a while you want to actually like talk to the human, or talk to the person. And LSD for him was the phone call. Like, it didn't take him far enough spiritually. And so for him, he really delved into a real practice that he worked on for his life. So yeah, I think it's a tool. It's exciting that it's becoming a tool that's available in the toolbox in some places, not in Wisconsin yet.
Right.
I'm connected with some organizations like the MAPS, who does psychedelic research. So I think, it's an exciting place to be, and we're kind of coming at it in a little bit more of an adult focus than we had with the 60s counterculture, where it was just like, everyone take acid. And, we got to be careful there, and Lang had a point that there is a place for it.
That's really cool. And I'm with you. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens as it becomes a tool, because it won't work for everybody, but it might be useful to some.
Yeah, I'm in love with this whole conversation. And you two come on every show. When Amy and I were pairing people together, we had no idea what would come out, but we are so amazed by
it's been a fun conversation. I'll be happy to come back anytime.
Your engagement. And I wanted just to end off this whole idea of insider knowledge and how do we communicate about this to wider church, wider hospital practices, wider society, so that it becomes commonplace to talk about mental illness and disability. I think a lot has happened, but a lot still is needing to be done. And so maybe we'll start with Matt and how you see this conversation getting further than the choir who's already singing the same hymn as us.
Right. So I will say that I think the conversation is becoming broader, and I think it is becoming more well known. To get away from the insider knowledge to outsider knowledge, I think it's a lot about exposure. Because I didn't know disability in theology was a thing until 2014, and I'm somebody with CP, right? So it's a fact of just letting people know that these venues for discussion and for writing exist. I think that's a big part of it. And I also think that people knowing that the definition of disability and what that means is a lot broader than what it used to be. The whole idea that, I mean, one of the interesting things in my own work right now is contemplating at what point does addiction become considered a disability? I really think that's a central question, because some of the people that I work with and that I serve, there's definitely avenues in society where they're left behind, where they don't have access to resources. And so broadening out the definition of what disability is, I think, is also an important step.
Thank you, Matt. That's helpful. So helpful. And Michael?
It's a great question, and I'm still kind of like thinking through it all. But part of that question is like, when, as you mentioned, the choir. When are we preaching to the choir, and when are we turning and preaching to the, the congregation? And the choir needs preaching too.
Yes.
But with that said, like I agree with what Matt is saying, that really we are seeing a change in how theology is engaging in disability studies, and disability studies engaging in theology, how the disability movement is itself broadening out. I've been involved with a Center for Independent Living and here in La Crosse, and they've really embraced a lot of mental health and addiction care, to the point where some of the other centers are kind of pushing back, and they're like, hey, you don't want to lose track on folks who are experiencing physical stuff too. And it's like, that's a fair point. We got to try and keep our balance. So yeah, I mean, this is one of the areas where we're seeing social change, and I think in many ways a good way, and yet we still have so far to go. I don't know how the these pop-up shelters are in your end, but like on our end here, our shelters are, many of them are not accessible. Many treatment centers are not accessible. Are we really thinking on ways to make things accessible to a wide variety of folks? And I mean, clearly the two of you have thought about that very intentionally with this podcast. Sometimes we come upon it unintentionally, like COVID has suddenly we've popped up all these ways. And there is something to be said for accident. But can we do it intentionally as well?
Well, thank you, Michael. That's very insightful, and we really appreciate your thoughts there. And Miriam and I just want to say thank you both so much for coming and giving of your time today to share with our listeners. And we hope that you'll come back too and give us part 2.
It was fun to nerd out with all of you.
Very true. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, it really was a pleasure. I'd love to be back. And a pleasure to meet all of you.
Indeed.